Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. When President Donald Trump announced that the United States was pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord just some weeks ago, he dealt a body blow to what was perhaps one of the biggest initiatives that was taken by countries around the world in order to meet these climate change objectives. And it's clear that with the second largest polluter, which is what the United States is, pulling out of this crucial agreement, there is already a body blow that has been dealt to those efforts to deal with climate change. However, what was also interesting to see was the response of other countries, for instance, of India and Prime Minister Modi's government, which reiterated very strongly that it was going to remain committed to the Paris Accord. It also reacted very sharply to President Trump's false accusation that India was taking billions and billions of dollars, as he put it. I think he used it 3 times, billions and billions and billions of dollars in order to sign up for the accord and to follow through on its commitments. We saw strong statements from European leaders like Angela Merkel, from the new French president, and that has led us to ask this question today about whether, even with the absence of the United States, countries like India, and Germany and France and of course China, whether they can fill that void and whether we can still meet those goals. Perhaps they won't be the same goals, but perhaps there are certain important milestones that can be met in this fight against climate change. I'd like to welcome our panel on the program this evening. We have with us Ibukun Adebayo, the co-head of emerging markets at the London Stock Exchange, Murthy Nuni, the CEO of Marshall Funds, Lilian Georgopoulos, product specialist at the London Stock Exchange, and Nalin Kohli. Lilian, let me ask you first. With the US pulling out, there were a lot of worried reactions across the world. But now that we've had some time to step back and look at the impact of that announcement, seeing the reactions from Europe, from China, from India, is there still hope?
I definitely think that there is still hope. And first of all, in the US, we have seen that following President Trump's announcement that governors and states and cities have jumped in, and they said that they still want to be part of the Paris Accord. So even if the US as a country does not want to be part of it, the individual states and cities, they still want to go ahead with their commitments. So this is encouraging even at the US side. Second of all, as you mentioned, European countries have now taken the lead, so this is extremely encouraging. And last of all, I just came back from Paris, where the ICMA's Green Bond Principles annual general meeting was just held. And I can say, because I have been attending this for the last 3 years in a row, given that London Stock Exchange is an observer of those principles, that it was the most well-attended event so far. As per ICMA's latest numbers, their membership has increased massively, which means from across the world. And also, for the first time, we saw a Chinese issuer, Bank of China, joining their executive committee. So this means that definitely there is hope. There is increased interest, which is growing in different geographies and in different product types. So from my point of view, there is... Yeah.
So you see a silver lining. But Mr. Adebayo, is there enough incentive for other countries to stay with this in the long term? In any case, the Paris Accord wasn't something that was compulsory or legally binding on countries to follow. But when you have a country like the United States pulling out, and right now you do have other countries coming together and saying, yes, you know, we're going to stand by our commitments. But is it something in the long term you see will sustain, especially with countries, say, like China?
I think absolutely it will be. I think there's a general concerted commitment to not just the Accord, but the Accord and all of the things that it stands for. And ultimately, the other day I was at the G20 summit, the Africa Partnership, and one of the things that was very interesting there was that even though African countries are probably the least polluters here, even they have decided that it's absolutely imperative that they take their place at the table and ensure that they meet the principles. Even though the the various initiatives in regards to reducing global carbon footprints for those countries are very, very detrimental, they're still signing up. And I liken it a little bit to the fact that, you know, you've seen, for example, African countries have never really created any global financial crisis, for example, yet they still sign up to the likes of the Basel Accords, et cetera, et cetera. So we're genuinely hopeful in totality that, that this is going to be something that everyone remains committed to for the foreseeable future.
It's great to hear that. Mr. Murthy, you share that optimism?
Yeah, in renewable energy and renewable technologies, the
which
leadership,
is what you've worked in.
Yeah, the leadership has never been with the USA. If you look at the top 10 wind turbine manufacturers, there's only one US manufacturer, which is GE, and their technology comes from Alstom, acquisition of Alstom Wind Energy from Germany and Spain, right? In the top 10 panel manufacturers for solar, there is only, I think it's First Solar. They are the only manufacturer of solar equipment from the USA. Likewise, in power generation, the leadership has been in the past with Germany. Germany has basically borne the burden of putting up huge amount of renewable energy when the prices were relatively high. So there were days when solar energy was done PPA at 50 cents. Today it's at something like 5 cents. But they've put up a lot of renewable energy at 50 cents, and therefore they've taken the burden of putting up a lot of capacity and therefore building the technology behind that. Now the leadership for technology has been taken over by China. Most of the panels in the world are made by the Chinese manufacturers. Out of the top 10, one is Korean, one is US. Rest are all from China.
But the US withdrawal, how does that impact the money, for instance, that a country like India would have got for buying cleaner technologies and investing in those? Yeah.
So in the Paris commitments, there are two issues which are basically, one is USA has to reduce their emissions by 25 to 26% by 2030, and these are non-binding commitments anyway. Yeah. So you need not have left the Paris Accord if you wanted to just reduce that 25% to 20%, if you didn't want to keep the commitments. On the second one is the fund, the climate fund, for which the leading countries have to contribute. By 2020, USA was due to pay about $2 billion. He'll probably renege on that. So that's
not coming. That money's not coming.
And they will probably renege on more by 2030. But hopefully, a new president comes in by then.
So, Nalin, is this an opportunity politically for leaders like Mr. Modi to really step in along with, say, an Angela Merkel, a President Macron, and take the lead on this issue?
I think they've already done that, both Macron as well as...
Yeah, but so I'm asking Nalin that is this really an opportunity politically on the global stage?
Well, I think one couple of things, in fact, is that India is committed to that, and Prime Minister Modi said it's an article of faith for us. End of the day, we need to just, and I think everyone who works on this, I'm not one who works on the sectors per se, but we realize that we have now significant problems, and what happens somewhere is having an impact everywhere. The weather patterns are changing, water issues are there. I mean, there are significant issues that are threatening not only livelihood, but even species survivals. I mean, many species we have lost, we are constantly losing, and we just are breeding too much. We're just too large, so we need to think of ways of, effectively looking at how we get through it. For India, I think 3 or 4 things are important. A, India has a history of sticking to its global commitments. The Indus Water Treaty, as we sometimes debate back home, but we've never moved away from what we've committed. Second is traditional Indian thinking has always been environment friendly. If you look back for really thousands of years, we've had this say that we need to look at the environment as more as a living being and tend to engage with it, regenerate it, things like that. With regard to non-renewable, this government's push, our government, Prime Minister Modi's government is doing a huge push in non-renewables. By 2022, the defense budget of India will be 1/4 of the budget that will be for power generation through non-renewable energy, 175 gigawatts. That's the target. And 16 we have done so far, which is pretty good. So we are moving down that line. You're right about the PPAs. In India also, they used to be signed at 8 rupees. They are down to 245, which was the last which I read in papers. So we are moving there. Another example is the LED bulbs. We've put in, what, 240 million bulbs we've changed, which is saving of money, but it's also a good move. So I think we are moving in that. I think it's an economic decision also. There's also a principal decision. There's also an economic decision. And yes, there's a great opportunity out there, because I don't think the United States is in a position to take any moral position on this. I mean, because there's a whole range of issues. This would be one of them. And international relations aren't conducted, won't ever be conducted on a single point. If it were like that, you'd have war on a regular basis. So there are multiple other ways of dealing with it. I mean, when it comes to investments, the day probably, as Mr. Murthy put it very succinctly, suppose there were 3 US companies who eventually, or a US company acquired 4 European companies, hypothetically, who work in this sector. Perhaps then good economics will bring in a good moral attitude towards climate change.
My only worry, Lillian, is whether countries will stay the course, which is what asked Mr. Adebayo as well. You are optimistic, but I think there is a fear that down the road, there will be countries who will hesitate or will change the goalposts. And do you also believe that politically this gives an opportunity, like I was asking Nalin, to other countries to take a lead on the global stage, and that in a sense you see a US president getting politically isolated internationally on a key issue?
Yes, like everyone has said, this definitely gives an opportunity to other countries to step up to the plate and take the lead on this, and especially emerging markets, because like Africa that Ibukun was mentioning, and India as well, although they are the smallest polluters and causes of the climate change, they're actually the ones that are being most heavily impacted by climate change. So we're seeing droughts in Africa and changing monsoon periods in India and across the world. So, and Latin America as well. So these countries, they know that they have to do their bit in terms of climate change, but also as they are moving towards their development phase, they have, by definition, massive infrastructure needs. So what more logical to build that infrastructure and not repeat the mistakes made by the countries of the developed world now, so they can build all this infrastructure in a more climate-friendly way. So
would you say that on that issue of infrastructure and the point I was raising earlier about money for clean technologies, do you think the absence of the US and that money will actually not make an impact because Europe and others will step in?
No, it's completely inconsequential,
Really?
the US in this respect. If you take a look at the amount of capital these days that is dedicated to investing into what's known as green projects, in 2012 that number was approximately 23 billion US dollars. Today that number is approximately $60 billion worth of capital that's now available to invest specifically in relation to a series of principles related to climate-friendly investing. The other point I want to make about that is that India has a real opportunity as well to also look at the complete principles in terms of what are loosely termed as environmental, social, and governance reporting and investing. I was very recently attending a working group that was led by the Indian High Commissioner, which is looking into the effects of climate change and pollution in major Indian tributaries of the Ganges, and looking at ways of cleaning and developing and cleaning up the Ganges using this capital, pools of global institutional capital that's available to make these, to reverse the effects. And equally on the social side as well, investing in projects that are specifically looking at not necessarily the investment return, but the return on social well-being. And I think these things should be thought of at the same time as the various green initiatives that are very much out there. And India can take a leading role here because it has a large population. It has also very, very efficient markets and access points to capital, as well as the initiative and the will.
I'm going to wrap up with one question for Mr. Murthy, which is that, and anyone can actually answer this, how do you deal with people who say it doesn't exist? Climate change, including the reality TV star who's running the world's most powerful democracy.
Yeah, I think it's scientifically proven. It is actually seen that climate patterns have changed. There are hurricanes.
But you have the naysayers, and you know they're very powerful people now. So what do you do? Irrespective of what people think, what Trump thinks. One thing that has significantly changed is the cost of renewable energy. It's now cheaper to put up a new renewable energy plant compared to a coal plant. So just the economics will make sure that more renewable energy comes up anyway. So the replacement of old plants will happen with renewable energy. The technology has changed. And countries like the European countries, Germany, Denmark, they've been supporting the developing countries a lot. I was doing some work in Vietnam, and there are a couple of German government agencies have actually mapped out the entire country in wind energy. They've put up like 10 substations, this wind resource assessment study. They put up these poles for like 12 months. Done the complete studies and made sure that the country is ready for putting up wind. They only have like 100 megawatt of wind energy. Which means you can do it if you have the will.
So they're really supporting the European countries are really supporting some of these developing countries to motivate them to go into the.
Well, I think what's been incredible, despite the US pullout, has been the way other countries have responded to that, and at the moment do appear committed to staying on course. No matter how much the goalpost may have shifted a bit, because at the end of the day, the US is a major player. But the fact that other world leaders have strongly committed themselves to the Paris Accord is something, is a positive thought to take home at the end of this day. Thank you very much to you on our panel and to our very patient audience.